Hi everyone, welcome. This event is a collaboration with the College and Career Center and the Civic Leadership Club. This is the second of our speaker series. I'm Manho Choi, the president of the Westmont Civic Leadership Club. I'd like to thank our guest today, Professor Marc Busch, for coming to talk to us about his career, Georgetown, and the economy. It's an honor to have you here, Professor. Professor Busch is a professor in international business diplomacy at Georgetown University and has previously taught at Queen's University and Harvard. He served as an advisor for the U.S. Department of Commerce, and he writes a biweekly opinion piece for The Hill on trade and hosts the Trade Craft podcast. Thank you for being here with us today.
Sure.
We'll ask you a few questions about your career, and then we'll go back and forth with questions from us and a general Q&A with the audience.
Okay.
So, first, this is a career talk, so we'll begin with your career.
Good.
You've had a long and distinguished career. Can you tell us what path you took to get where you are today? Like, what did you major in college, and what job did you have before becoming a professor?
Great question. So can you just acknowledge that you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Well, I went to college and didn't really think about anything other than going to law school. And I did politics, and in my senior year, I got a chance to do a senior thesis, and I kind of fell in love with the idea of doing research. And after graduating, I did a master's degree, and then I actually went to become a consultant. So I was a consultant at a company for a year, and then I went to grad school, and I did my PhD in New York at Columbia University. And then that kind of led directly into being an academic. And so in my efforts to become an academic, I have done consulting on the side and advised governments and companies. And yeah, that's kind of how I did this. I wish there was some great master plan that I had, but there really wasn't. And my best advice to everybody in the room is to be flexible enough to roll with the punches and to see what comes up and to be able to act on opportunities when they present themselves. And I have to say that in my 28 years of being a professor, I really have never seen anybody neatly map out their career, least of all myself. So that's kind of a long and the short of it, but happy to answer specific questions about anything that I said.
Do you recommend students take the path that you took?
Well, there's not a lot of choice in terms of doing your undergrad, and you're all going to end up finding out the hard, cold reality that you're all going to have to go back to grad school. So whether you take a year off or not really depends on a number of variables. I have a whole bunch of students right now pondering that exact question. My advice to my students who do really well on their LSATs is to go right to law school, get it over with, and move on with their lives. But I also like the idea of taking a year or two out and just getting used to a professional environment. And I have 4 kids, and I'm big on all of them taking time off. And my son, who's 27, actually did his undergrad at Georgetown and is currently in his second year at NYU Film School. So he took a very different path than I did.
All right, thank you. We'll take a question from the audience now. Would anyone like to ask a question? Yeah, we have a question here.
Okay.
Like, one of the biggest concerns for families across the country right now is inflation. So what is the driving force of inflation right now, and when do you expect it to ease?
Well, I'm not a macroeconomist, so I don't really dabble that much in terms of what to make of the inflationary bout at the moment, but certainly it is a concern and it's hurting at the pocketbook, and that is going to make it a very political issue. And obviously there are some policy issues that have to be sorted out, including what the central bank does. But it really is a very complicated effort, and you'll see that when you get to college and you are required, like here at Georgetown, to take both micro and macro. I've never been a big fan of studying macro because anything can happen in macro, and I like the determinacy of micro.
Do you expect inflation to ease anytime soon?
Don't know. Probably not anytime really soon, and certainly not within one electoral cycle, which puts us into the midterms, which is probably how you're going to hear about it framed. What matters for politicians isn't quite the long run outlook of the economy itself, and short run cycles like worrying about heading into November 2022 will dominate.
So you expect this to run throughout 2022?
Well, it's kind of like I told you, Madden. I'm not a macroeconomist, and I don't really have any point estimates of my own to draw upon. I'm just a trade guy.
Of course. So now back to us, Professor. Thank you for answering that question. So what's it like at Georgetown, and would you recommend that Westmont students apply?
Absolutely. It's a very exciting environment, not least because it's in Washington, D.C. I have a lot of students who are interning on the Hill, meaning that they are working for members of Congress on a part-time basis, some of them too many hours a week in my view, but nonetheless, we call them Hill turns, and they're pretty active. It's a really great undergraduate student body. I believe SFS, the School of Foreign Service, is ranked 4th in the United States for undergrad in international affairs. And that really is what you come to Georgetown to do, international affairs. I'm grading right now, so I have a lot of very strong opinions about what it is that high school students should be doing to get ready for college. And so if you want to hear about those strong views, let me know. But nothing is worse about my job than grading. And my plea to everyone listening right now is get good at writing. And enough with these goddamn rubrics. Give me logic, give me evidence. That's all I want to see.
Thank you, Professor Busch. Expanding upon that point, you said so I think we have a lot of students who actually, I heard someone in the back over there who said they, want to go to Georgetown.
Yeah.
So what do you recommend students, prepare for, on their college applications? What do you recommend they do if they want to go to Georgetown or a school like Georgetown?
Well, it's the same at any good school. Stop making up stories for your letter of statement. Don't get your parents to write your letters of statement, and don't try and be something you're not in your letters of statement. So it really is very obvious when there is a bit of a sell in those. And I have to say that I've only done admissions myself once. And the challenge, as you'll all discover, is that there are a lot of good students out there with a lot of good SAT scores. Be yourself and don't play up something that you're not. And when we ask you at Georgetown to write a policy statement, do a little bit of research and figure out something that is more tangible. Don't solve world peace in your policy statement. Do something that is discrete, something that lends itself to an empirically falsifiable solution. That's what we're looking for. But generally, there's only so many things in your control. And one thing I would urge you all to do is whoever's writing your letters of reference, please go meet them and talk to them about your goals. Those are really important, and it doesn't do enough for you to get a letter from someone who says, I understand Madden did well in my class and he got a B+, and isn't that terrific? That's not a letter of reference. That's crap. So let's get those letters of reference written by people who actually know you. Don't bluff in your statement. Do some research on your policy piece, which is kind of unique to Georgetown, and we rotate that up every other year. But in general, don't be overly stressed. All 4 of my kids got really stressed during all the info sessions and all the pitches and stuff like that. It's easy to get psyched out and worried about your SATs and stuff like that. Just be yourself in your application and obviously do as well as you bloody well can. But don't bluff.
Don't bluff. We actually have a question about college applications from Neil here.
Okay,
Neil.
Neil. What do you got, Neil?
So how do we stand out on college applications? Should we go for being well-rounded or emphasize our quirks?
I think the trend right now is quirks, but I want to answer that question slightly differently than what you might be looking for. Don't game the system. Just be yourself. And well-rounded for you might be differently perceived by us. I know that we're very keen on seeing proof that you're committed to, your extracurricular activities or what have you, but I wouldn't try and pad the CV with a lot of miscellaneous nonsense, which is certainly a habit that we see all too often. My students are really good, and when I ask them what they wrote about, it's remarkable how heterogeneous their statements are. Some of them are reflecting on their ambitions, some of them are reflecting on their past, but please stay away from the I love to travel, I love to read, I love to go for long walks on the beach. We're so tired of seeing this nonsense.
Thank you for that question. Now back to us, Professor. So in recent years, the number of colleges have been declining across the country. Do you expect that trend to continue?
Oh, sure. COVID wreaked havoc with the business model of a lot of universities. And I would expect that you're going to see a lot of consolidation. And there's also a lot of competing pressure from non-universities, meaning that the certification game is picking up. And I know that at least one Yale computer science professor has conjectured that in 5 years or so, the majority, or at least a decent minority of people, will not be going to college. They'll be running around collecting certifications instead. So the pressures on the industry as a whole, and we are an industry, have changed markedly, and it's probably a good thing for some consolidation. I don't know how the United States can be the market that's deep enough for 4,000 universities or whatever it is, colleges and universities. But yeah, you should all be looking to get into the very best school you can, but that means something very particular. Don't get all enamored by the facilities that you see when you go to college on these visits. You know, my twin daughters fell in love with Duke University pretty fast, given the beauty of the cafeteria and the dorms. Yeah, that's terrific, but you're really going to have to find out where you fit in and what school is going to bring out your strengths and help you ameliorate your weaknesses. And that does require some kicking of the tires. Go and meet students. Ask them, what is it like here? What's the stress level in terms of this, that, and the other? Do I have to do an internship? What are the clubs like? Stuff like that's really important to get right. So it's more than just kind of looking at US news and seeing who's top 3. You've really got to go and take a look at the schools. I have a weird policy, though, for my own kids. We go visit what you get into.
Oh, wow.
So enough of this kind of going on world tours and falling in love with the residences and deciding based on that. Apply, see where you get in, and then go seriously kick the tires where you get in, then make your decision.
So you would say that that a college's culture is more important than one would expect?
Well, you're looking at a small standard deviation with respect to quality in the top, say, 25, 30 schools. So I don't know what you're learning on your college visit that's going to be determining with respect to quality. What you need to figure out is the culture of the school. And having taught at Harvard, I can tell you that Harvard has a very different vibe to it than Georgetown, and it's important to know the differences. And the worst thing that I saw while I was a professor at Harvard was just witnessing these kids who are in over their heads. Know what you're getting and kick the tires and make sure that the school is going to bring out the best in you. That's really important to get right. You don't just go to a top 3 school without understanding what that means. And you're going to have to, like I keep saying, kick the tires. But the best way to do that is to meet the kids who actually go there. And you don't say, gee, how much do you like this place? You ask them, what are the stressors here? What is the culture here? Am I going to get into a professor's office hours? Am I going to get into a club? It's really competitive to get into some of these clubs. My son was a standout on the Georgetown Model UN team, which is ranked #1 in the world.
Wow.
And that took him 2 years to get to. That was not an easy walk-on. And his first year on the team, he did nothing. So you've got to look into these things and ask yourself, am I ready for that? Am I ready to be turned down a lot?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Professor. We will definitely make sure to, us at the College and Career Center will make sure to invite students who have gone to these schools and ask them what their experiences are in the future. We
But
actually have a
also,
question.
when you go to the well, hold on. When you go to the school and when you visit the school, this is what you do. Don't go walking around the cafeteria saying, "Wow, this is great." Go and meet kids who go to those schools. That's the key to those visits.
Yeah, yes, we will make sure to invite them back, like our alumni who've left Westmont, who go to these schools. That's what I was saying. We actually have a question from the audience. Here's Diego.
All right.
I'm interested in agricultural economics. Do agricultural tariffs have a positive or negative impact on just that entire business?
Agricultural tariffs are certainly an issue, but we have a lot more issues in agriculture than just the tariffs themselves. In fact, even agricultural subsidies are a little bit passé right now. We have what I love to do in terms of what I help litigate at the World Trade Organization, sanitary and phytosanitary cases, namely health and safety with respect to plants, animals, and humans. That's really the frontier for agricultural trade, meaning what are the maximum residue limits allowed on pesticides, what are the hormones that you're allowed to inject into your cattle, and how do trade barriers over these concerns impede the flow of commerce. And that's something that is pretty vibrant right now and is certainly a big component part of what I teach in my undergraduate course on international trade law.
Your dog is pretty cute. He's in the background right now.
Yeah, she's a big dog, and she's looking for my wife right now, not realizing that my wife has gone to see my daughter at Georgetown.
Nice. We have another question from the audience. Mary.
Right.
So, why is college in the US so expensive while in Europe it can be free?
Well, it's a really interesting question. And the fact is that where you've got the public subsidies, like in my native land of Canada, where undergraduate tuition is far cheaper, you kind of get what you pay for. And the question of whether the market or the government is dictating prices has a bearing on quality and what is offered to you. But I would urge you all to look at some European schools. For that matter, I would wager that some of you may find that going to University of Toronto is a great bargain as well. But you're right. It's a bit of a mystery how every school in the United States seems to have exactly the same $70,000 tuition this year. And it's hard to figure out how the market bears that out. But going back to Madden's earlier question, obviously the market is not bearing that out, and you're seeing some schools collapse. Moreover, this whole online stuff is going to present some interesting questions for lesser tier schools. Do they push more of their content online, which is infinitely cheaper to deliver, but students don't like it as much? So we'll see. But to answer your question, in the United States, there is much more of an emphasis on the market, however fettered the market may be at times. But I got to tell you, I'm not responsible. And ultimately, I can't do anything about rolling back tuition fees.
Does anybody else have a question?
Yes.
About? Yes.
I have a question about the supply shortage. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a problem. And it's going to be a problem for a while.
Do you
You
think
turn
it's
off
a
the-
problem?
Sorry?
Do you think it's a problem with manufacturers themselves, or do you believe it's a problem on a system scale?
Both. When you shut down and when you're forced to shut down for a while, it's hard to ramp up again. And clearly the supply chains are spread thin. And this isn't just a US phenomenon. I heard this morning about some of the woes in Australia. But big picture, there are regulatory issues that are hampering recovery. There are policy issues, like with respect to trade, that are hampering recovery. And ultimately, business was going to take a while to flip the switch on again, no matter what. But there's a confluence of issues here. And whatever this new variant is not seeding a lot of business confidence. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the near term. But yeah, it's a tough time out there. And whether it's purely systemic or whether it's firm level, I think there's evidence of both.
So do you think that without any policy change, it will continue to struggle?
Oh, well, you're going to see a secular return just by virtue of time, but there are policies that could be undertaken, like what's going on with respect to certain of the key ports here in the United States, namely letting them run 24 hours a day and potentially allowing them to violate noise ordinances and things of that sort. But hard to believe that that's really the level at which we are at the moment, and yet that is exactly where we are. And remember, U.S. supply chains are global, so it's not just what we here in the United States do. We've got to worry about what other countries are doing as well. You got to keep in mind what a supply chain really entails. In the case of semiconductors, for example, you've got component parts that are traveling 24,000 miles before final assembly. That is an amazing journey. And those 24,000 miles cover a lot of countries. So it's not as though one government has the magic answer. You've got a lot of coordination that's got to happen, and we don't have a lot of coordinating going on at the moment.
Speaking on that, on recovery, are tariffs hampering our recovery? That they are a factor, obviously, in, some products being pricier, you could say. So are they hampering our recovery?
Sure. Tariffs are never a good story. Tariffs are always a political story. And COVID really laid bare the embarrassing story of tariffs, where globally speaking, the average tariff on sanitary soap stands at 17%. That is a cruel and unusual reality that got very little coverage during COVID. Instead, obviously, most of the attention is on intellectual property, but wildly, there's a lot of tariffs out there that are hampering vaccines. There are a lot of tariffs out there that are doing real injustices to especially poor consumers around the world. And that is something that has to change.
That's an interesting point. You recently wrote in a opinion piece that criticizing an act that was introduced by some Midwestern senators, Sherrod Brown and Bob Casey, I believe, about on the with the goal of strengthening supply chains by strengthening domestic manufacturing. You were criticizing it, but is there a way to is there a way to strengthen or secure our supply chains without securing domestic manufacturing?
My complaint about what the three protectionist senators want to propose is that they are essentially extending Buy American throughout the supply chain, which is an impossibility. So if you take, for example, pharmaceuticals, and I've been an advisor to PhRMA, the trade association, the reality is that 2/3 of active pharmaceutical ingredients are sourced from 8 countries through Asia. So good luck bringing that supply chain home. What they were doing, and this is the political spin on it, was they were just trying to be protectionist by framing it as anti-Chinese. Well, there's a lot of things that we're going to lose access to if we play through some of these endeavors, and one of them is your iPhone. Good luck getting iPhone 13s in the future if they have their way, because there's a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment that informs their Buy American policies, which can't be delivered because Apple doesn't make the iPhone here in the United States. It merely designs it here in the United States. And you've got Foxconn in China doing most of the manufacturing. I would wager that next year we're all going to be looking for those iPhone 14s, and they're not going to be easy to get if, in fact, the holy trinity of protectionist senators has their way.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, in a 50-50 Senate, they have quite a lot of influence.
Well, but it's not getting much traction because business is explaining to politicians that it's simply make-believe. And the more that we see this, and the more that we see American businesses suing the U.S. government for lousy trade policy before the U.S. Court of International Trade, the more likely we are to get this story right.
This is a bit of a controversial topic, but there have been papers that were published by I believe it was the Cato Institute, saying that measures against child labor, banning it per se, were net negative because overall, when it was banned, it just forced the children. It didn't force them into schools, just forced them into poverty. Is that true? Do you believe that happens?
It's not my area of research, and Cato does some pretty good studies. And obviously, the question is, if they're not doing that particular function, what are they doing? Child labor is very fraught with political emotions, and obviously, there are. I'm picking up a lot of noise back there.
Sorry, I think there's someone who's making noise. I will move them. Don't worry. Sorry, we can continue.
Yeah,
now.
it's a fraught issue, and clearly there are concerns that we don't want to see children forced into labor, but there are obviously families that need to have everybody working in order to have a livelihood, and this is, I'm sure, the point of the Cato paper.
Is there any other questions from the audience about college, about Georgetown, about the economy, about trade, anything at all?
What's Georgetown about?
Okay.
What is Georgetown University about? Or like, what's their main focuses?
It's a full service university, so it caters to all the disciplines, but in my little niche of Georgetown at the School of Foreign Service, we do international affairs and I do international trade. But like any other school offering full service menu, the majors are all over the place, from the hard sciences to the humanities to the social sciences and everything in between. So the sell is clearly that there are certain strengths, as there are at any given university campus, and our most obvious formidable strength is international affairs.
International affairs.
Do you guys have any aviation programs?
I'm sorry?
Aviation programs?
No.
Oh.
I think another issue that's come up lately is labor unions. I think people there have been a lot more strikes as of late. Are labor unions a big factor in our economic recovery? Are they needed, or are they almost getting in the way?
Well, first of all, unions are small in the private sector, about 6% of U.S. employment. In the public sector, they're a bigger presence, but whether they're needed or not, again, I'm a trade guy and I really don't dabble in labor economics. Let's do some more questions on getting ready for college, because here's my recommendation. First of all, math is power. Hate to say it, but it's true. So if you think that you can go to college and hide from math, you're wrong. So do it now. Here's another thing. Here's another thing. Learn to do public speaking. It's key. It's crucial. And I send my undergrads to improv, because there's nothing more important that you can do than learn to speak in public, and in particular to answer questions. And all the cool jobs that all my students want after they graduate Georgetown depend on them being able to speak. And unfortunately, in high school, there aren't enough opportunities to speak. And for that matter, there aren't in college either, which is why I send my students to improv. So first, math is power. Second, learn how to speak in public. And third, learn how to write. It's really, really key to keep those sentences short, to discover what God intended a semicolon to do, and to make sure that your writing is accessible. When I graduated high school, I thought that the more impenetrable my writing was, the smarter it was.
Professor Busch, we're about to end. Lunch is about to end in like literally a minute or less than. So we're doing finals like right now, and in the next 3 days. So do you have any advice for us? Last minute advice.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Professor Busch. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you.